does this have any effect, really, what's happening on the country's international relations?
To answer that, we are joined by geopolitical analyst slash vlogger, Richard Heydarian. Thanks for joining us again today.
Thank you, Richard.
Ken, what's up? Good morning.
Richard, you want some popcorn?
We have popcorn here.
Anyway, let's first off, what's your reaction about this latest remarks ni VP Sara? Did you really expect this kind of reaction?
Mukhang mas kailangan ko kape guys sa popcorn hanggang 2 a.m. pa yung mga interviews ko. Kahit si General Torre, nin-interview kanina ukol dun sa nangyaring insidente sa Kongreso. Actually, gusto ko mag-react sa mga discussion kanina. Pero sige, sagutin ko muna yung mga sinasabi niyo. Tinanap niyo. Well, pagdating dito sa nangyari, hindi naman ito yung first time, di ba? Nakita man natin nung isang buwan din nung gumanon si Vice Presidente na nag-fantasize daw siya or minsan nangangarap daw siya, napipikon daw siya na gusto niyang puguran yung isang tao na ayaw niya. So this is not the first time na narinig natin. At sinabi rin ng NBI yan, di ba? The National Bureau of Investigation top officials also the other day said that nung first time narinig nila yan, they took it as symbolic. I think yun din ang term na ginamit ng analyst kanina dati to explain it away. But how are you gonna explain it away now, di ba? Yun ang tanong ko, hindi mo pwede sabihin na symbolic yan ng symbolic every time nangyari yan. As you correctly pointed out, saan ka sa mundo makahanap ng isang headline kung saan the Vice President of this country is talking about hiring an assassin to kill the President? And how on earth is that gonna make a country look good, right? And how on earth is that a reflection na na ang gulo ay galing sa presidente? You know, like you can criticize the president on so many levels, but clearly ang destabilization, ang gulo, all of the wrong rhetoric is coming from one side of the equation. It's not President Marcos Jr. who has been going after the Dutertes. It's not anyone else. It's the Dutertes who have been going after President Marcos Jr. and questioning his mandate. So I think we have to be very clear about the direction of let's just use the same term that Duterte used to use, destabilization in this case. So, no, this doesn't reflect well at all on the country. This is not good for investments. This doesn't make the job easy for people like me who go all around the world and say, give Philippines a second look. Sana mag-invest kayo ng lalo sa Pilipinas. Sana papunta dito yung manufacturing, hindi Malaysia, hindi Vietnam. And then sasabihin nila, pero hindi ganyan, wala naman ganyan sa Malaysia at Vietnam. Hindi naman yung kanilang deputy prime minister or yung deputy president nila ay nagsasabi na gusto kong puguran yung ulo ng presidente. So this doesn't reflect well on the country, and this definitely doesn't reflect well on the vice president of the Philippines. So I don't know, siguro on a mild level, tama naman siguro sinabi ni Senate President Jesus Cordero, if she needs help, if she's feeling too much pressure, then maybe she should get professional help. On a less mild level, you could say that maybe she's not aware of the duties of the Vice President, na hindi trabaho ng Vice Presidente to not once but multiple times threaten the President of the Republic of the Philippines.
But Richard, do you agree with Maluti Kia's statement earlier saying na huli na or dapat noon pa nag-react itong si Pangulong Bongbong Marcos with regards to the mga statements ng Duterte?
Well, I mean, it's not like President Marcos Jr. did not make any reaction, right? Kung titignan natin, talaga nagsimula itong giyera nito, no? I've called it a kind of a semi-civil war. Nung January pa, when President Rodrigo Duterte, dun sa kanyang speech sa Davao, openly attacked the President, called for separation of Mindanao, and many saw that as essentially a form of insurrection. Even President Duterte talked about it's another people power against another Ferdinand Marcos. So this has been going on for quite some time, and then nakita naman natin yung responses from the Marcos administration has been varied. So President Marcos din medyo nag-joke din siya about fentanyl kasi na-accuse siya na gumagamit ng illegal na droga. And then yung First Lady, of course, later on came out and said na batshot na daw siya. Literally, batshot na siya kay Vice Presidente. But in fairness naman, it was not until recently that the Vice President herself adopted a very aggressive rhetoric. Because before that, it's more Digong and Baste and the rest of the member of the Duterte dynasty. So I agree in a sense that, in fairness naman, Marcos Jr. gave chance to Sara Duterte herself to to keep away or keep above the fray. But even Sara Duterte obviously eventually also adopted the kind of line and rhetoric of her father. So siguro, dapat sana una pa lang judgment call ni Marcos, it's easy to say now, na una pa lang sinabi niya na any attack on me, whether it's from the former president or vice president, etc., that, that threatens the republic, that destabilizes the republic is not welcome. At sana sumagot siya. But we know that's not really the personality of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. And let's be honest, if Ferdinand Marcos Jr. acted more aggressively in his rhetoric earlier this year, baka sasabihin natin, nako, magiging dictatorship na tayo. So I think, precisely because his name is Ferdinand Marcos, he has always been very careful not to sound as too authoritarian or too aggressive. But I agree also with Malu that perhaps that was perceived as diffidence, masyadong mabait, and that may have encouraged the Dutertes to keep on pushing the envelope. But that doesn't justify the Vice President of the Republic saying the things she's saying. But this is really out of this world.
But Richard, kasi some would point out a very popular quote that if you keep the dog on a loose leash, then he tends to bite your hand multiple times. So ang point within is several analysts have compared the presidency of similarities between Bongbong Marcos and the late Benigno Aquino. Si Noynoy, correct me if I'm wrong, no? Early on in his presidency, every time he was displeased with certain people attacking him, he would go on the record immediately and he would not mince words. He would be straight to the point. Ito daw si PBBM, ang nagiging problem, he's trying, because you mentioned he is a Marcos, he's trying to tame it down and dinadaan sa joke. Like for example, Tokhang, binanggit niya yung chichirya. Do you think at this point in time, it's time to step up the ante for PBBM to put his foot down and say, look, I'm gonna control this and nip it in the bud?
Well, I mean, President Aquino, God bless his soul, also got a lot of pushback and criticism. Some felt he a bit too pecan, right? Not only him, but also many members of his administration were accused of being pecan and onion-faced, etc. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly the case, but that was also the cost of President Aquino's approach. And some would say at some point, ang nangyari din sa Aquino administration is, hindi na rin nila nakikita yung katotohanan. In a sense that they didn't appreciate yung backlash dun sa mismanagement or perceived mismanagement ng Yolanda, ng Mama Sapano, which I think was a horrible mistake by the former administration. So, lumabas sila na masyadong defensive, if not pecan. So I think eventually that came back to haunt them, right? And that's why the backlash of Duterte. I think the presidency of Rodrigo Duterte in 2016, in many ways, it was also about this pent-up frustration that this outgoing administration may have. Okay, hindi sila corrupt, medyo matino, etc., etc. Pero grabe naman, they cannot take any criticism. Remember, even when the Supreme Court came out with that rule against the disbursement acceleration program, President Aquino came out in a press conference and criticized the Supreme Court. I'm not sure how that reflect very well on the president who was supposed to be reformist and liberal. Again, God bless his soul, but these were actually some of the areas where I had somehow disagreement with the previous administration. Even on West Philippines, I realized, if you criticize their strategy, bakit puro kayong legal warfare, wala kayong ginagawa on the ground in terms of strengthening our position sa pag-asa, hindi rin masyadong nag-sink in. So actually, I would criticize the Aquino administration for not being open enough to criticism and sometimes sounding as too defensive, despite all the merits and good things that happened during that administration. Now, speaking of BBM, yes, more could have been done, more could have been said, but as I said nga, may stigma kasi Ferdinand Marcos Jr. yung pangalan niya. Pangalawa, this strategy has worked This strategy, you want to call it good Machiavellian, you want to call it mabait, whatever. It worked. I mean, look at Marcos Jr. He won the biggest ever, margin for any president. He got the majority of the vote, the highest since his father in the 1960s. So siguro a part of his mind was saying, nag-work naman bakit ko kailangan? Why should I change my tricks if it's working, right? But now, obviously, it's no longer working. But I'll tell you what, yes, may mga patama siya, chicheria, Tokhang, obviously, piatos, yung pinag-usapan ng mga religious. I'm not to name it, right? Either cheaping piatos, whatever. But, I'll be honest, I'm an Ilocano, so I've seen the Marcoses throughout the years. I've met President Marcos Jr. in the past. I've been observing him as an expert for quite some time. Ito masasabi ko, I've never seen Marcos Jr. this angry He really looked angry.
Yeah, he
Now,
did.
he
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
look angry like Digong, but he looked angry. This is really an angry BBM. So sabi ko nga, the Dutertes might regret it because they may have finally brought out the Marcos in him. Because to be honest, as an Ilocana, I'll say, I've seen more of Romualdez in him. You know,
Yes, yes.
He's very malumanay, very gentlemanly.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I
he's
agree with
more
that.
Totoo.
Romualdez.
Parang let
Now
me-
you saw the Marcos. Talagang, I would say the president was really pissed off. And accordingly, I think the hammer might come down. And speaking of the hammer coming down, ang nakikita ko dito is snowball effect. So, kung titignan mo, kung bawat issue lang, kaya siguro ng mga Duterte yan. Impeachment, siguro marami naman senador dyan na ayaw madamay dito kasi baka yung solid south, kakatin sila mamaya sa elections, di ba?
Right.
Yung Duterte base. I'm sorry, criminal cases, they can, go to the court and appeal it and it can go on forever. Because ICC, they can also, appeal it at the Supreme Court. So, marami issue na individually, I think the Dutertes can push back and handle. But ang problema kasi, nagkukumpul-kumpul na yan eh. I think it's very possible you'll see a snowballing of multiple cases against the Dutertes so that the wall will close in on them. So the impeachment may not work as things stand. But what if NBI or AFP unearth evidence that indeed a certain assassin may have been hired? That indeed there may have been seditious plans or coup plots, right? What if at the same time, lalong ma-empower yung ICC to feel confident enough to issue a warrant of arrest, right?
That's right. That's
What
right.
if at the same time there will be criminal charges filed against Sara Duterte that could eventually disqualify her from running in 2028? Hindi ito impeachment, but criminal charges can happen against Vice President because she doesn't have absolute immunity. She can be held culpable for serious crimes. So pag sumabay-sabay lahat ng mga yan, and then yung mga Nograleses get full support from the administration in the upcoming midterm elections, you can imagine all of this, if they converge, then that could really put the Dutertes on the defensive. Now, a while ago, I heard something about galit na galit ang tao sa corruption. Well, last thing last thing I saw is like everyone's talking about, Mary Grace Piatos. That has nothing to do with President Marcos Jr. That has nothing to do. Now, kung strategy ng kabila is to say, wait lang. Sino ba kayo para sabihin corrupt kami? Kayo nga, ganun. But so who's gonna benefit from this? You mentioned Trump, right? Coming back in the US. Well, in Trump, it was very clear. Biden is supposedly incompetent. I'm competent, bring me back. Here, my Mary Grace Piatos, diba? Here, my confidential fund. So who are people going to vote? If people are angry at the Marcos administration, are they going to vote for the side who is now being investigated right and left for alleged abuse and of confidential funds? So I think, the winner here could be a third force. Could be the Tulfos, especially if the Tulfos can distance themselves enough from both sides. And in theory, could also be the progressive liberal opposition
Pwede
if they
rin.
get their together.
Do you see the rise? Go ahead. No, so go ahead.
No,
Right.
I was gonna
Go ahead.
ask nga kung may pagkakataon pa ba na makalusot dito or makabangon ng mga Duterte after all of this?
Yeah, oo.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, again, going back to the case of Trump, but I can go with Berlusconi, Taksins.
Yeah, that's right.
Examples all around the world. Orban, in the case of Hungary, I call it populist comeback, right? So, hindi lang si Trump ang greatest comeback in human history. We have so many great comebacks in different countries, right? Populist comeback. Yeah, I think if mga Dutertes makalusot sila in the next years, because I think the next 12 months will be very, very difficult for Dutertes, including the midterm elections. Tama naman si Malu, for instance, kanina na she mentioned about the advantages of the incumbency. But if President Marcos Jr. doesn't follow through dun sa speech niya, yung galit version niya, maybe not galit enough to many people, but galit version niya nevertheless, there's no follow-through to that. If itong mga hearings na to ay hanggang free airtime lang ito sa mga congressman at walang mga kaso na ma-file, if the ICC doesn't coming in the next 6 months to 9 months, and if the Dutertes win all the top position, meaning Polong winning in the Congress and Digong winning in the mayor office, if they hold on, if they hunker down for the next 6 to 12 months, then by 2026 and 2027, maybe they can be in a position to plot their comeback. Because by that time, papunta na sa lame duck year si BBM. By that time, ang pag-usapan ng 2028. And by that time, if number 1 or number 2 pa rin si Sara Duterte sa mga surveys, may masabi sila. So it's really, I think, the next 6 to 12 ones will be crucial. So speaking of quotes, di ba, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, when you strike at the king, essentially make sure you finish the job. So
Yeah.
now the Dutertes having all of these strikes at them right and left. If that doesn't lead to something decisive, they may come back even stronger, not only as victims, but they're going to be also vengeance. And I think that's really the lesson.
I'd like to ask you on my end, Richard. Well, you're right. At least there's been a populist comeback across all over the world. But we've already had a populist president in Rodrigo Duterte. A lot of people are tired of politicians. A lot of people are tired, in the Philippines at least, of the populist look. Because parang may faction na pagod kay Duterte, may faction na napapagod na sa mga politiko dahil sa nangyayaring yun. Now, who could possibly be that third force? Do we see the resurgence of the pink wave, a yellow wave, or somebody dark horse that you see that's slightly galloping on the side na malay mo biglang naging high-ho silver, naging puti yung kabayo?
Tagalog ba or English?
White Knight.
Yan si Bitag, yan si Erwin, yan si Rafi. I think all of them are doing fantastic. I think time is underset. I actually, sa aking basa, pagsusuri sa politika sa Pilipinas, para sa akin, all politicians are populists in the Philippines. It's just a question of variety of populism, right? Some are more, populist, gusto niya ng, bigyan ko kaya ng maraming pagkain. I mean, Enrile, right? The other election, sabi niya, di ba? Gusto ko maging senator para bigyan ko kaya ng maraming pagkain. Or yung mga budots nung isa pang senador. So actually what we have are variations of populism. But the Duterte brand is really different. I think Dutertismo is really the most coherent, the most aggressive form of populism we have seen in Philippine history, and one of the most aggressive anywhere in the world. So it's a very coherent brand.
Yeah.
Habang yung iba, populism is more like a tactics lang. So populism could be a style and tactics, and populism could be an ideology, not style. Sa mga Duterte kasi ideology din siya eh. Meron talaga silang pananaw na very unique from all other presidents, essentially anti-constitutional, essentially outside the box, no, on so many levels, and more pro-China and Russia than anything else. But you're right, kanina, binanggit din natin yan. I think the Tulfos, the fact that they're doing so good in surveys, Rafi Tulfo is number 1 for the next president in number of surveys, or at least tied for number 1. Erwin and Ben Tulfo are competing for number 1 in the Senate race. That just tells you, hindi po nasasawa. Populism pa more. Diba? ang gusto ng tao is new version. Give us something parang parang Netflix yan. Okay, season 2.
New version, season 2.
Well said, Mr. Heydarian. Populism pa more.
More.
Yes. Okay, sige. Fortunately, we don't have much
Ginusto
time.
natin to. Ginusto natin yan. Huwag tayo
Totoo. And then we expect different result. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us today, Geopolitical Analyst Richard Heydarian. Thank you.